The transport ship descended through clouds of purple gas, and Sergeant Marcus Cole pressed his face against the window, like a child seeing snow for the first time. Below him stretched the capital world of the Volanthi Dominion, and it was nothing like Earth. Crystal towers rose from the ground like frozen lightning, and they caught the light of 3 distant suns. Rivers of silver liquid wound between structures that seemed grown rather than built. Marcus had seen many alien worlds during his 15 years of service, but Thyra Prime made him feel very small indeed. He pulled back from the window and checked his reflection in the dark glass. A tired face stared back at him, with a scar running from his left eyebrow to his jaw. His brown hair was cut short in military fashion, and his green eyes carried the weight of too many battles. He was 42 years old, and felt every single year in his bones. "Attention all passengers," the ship's computer announced. "We will arrive at the Royal Landing Platform in 10 minutes. Marcus gathered his single bag and stood in the narrow corridor. He was the only human on this ship, and the Volanthi passengers had kept their distance during the entire journey. They were insectoid beings that stood nearly 8 feet tall, with 4 arms and hard shells that gleamed like polished metal. Their compound eyes showed no emotion, and Marcus had learned long ago that reading their body language was almost impossible. The war between humans and Volanthi had ended 30 years ago. It had been brief but brutal, and both sides had lost millions. Now they maintained an uneasy peace through trade agreements and diplomatic gestures. This exchange program was one such gesture, and Marcus had drawn the short straw. The ship landed with barely a bump, and the doors hissed open. Warm air rushed in, carrying strange scents that Marcus could not name. He stepped onto the platform and squinted against the bright light. A delegation waited for him, and at its head stood the largest Volanthi he had ever seen. This one wore armor of deep crimson and carried a staff topped with a glowing crystal. His 4 arms were crossed, and his mandibles clicked with what Marcus guessed was impatience. "You are the human soldier," the large Volanthi stated, rather than asked. "Sergeant Marcus Cole of the Terran Coalition," Marcus replied with a salute, "reporting for duty. I am Commander Vyrek, head of the Royal Guard." The Volanthi made no gesture of greeting. "Follow me and do not speak unless spoken to. Do not touch anything. Do not look directly at the Queen. Do you understand these simple instructions?" Marcus kept his face neutral, even as anger flickered in his chest. "Understood, Commander." They walked through corridors of crystal and light. Volanthi workers and nobles passed them, and every single one stared at Marcus with what he assumed was disgust. He heard whispers in their clicking language, and caught words he recognized: primitive, animal, dangerous. He had expected this, and it still stung. The throne room doors were 30 feet tall and carved with scenes of ancient battles. They swung open silently, and Marcus got his first look at Queen Selithra. She was smaller than he expected, and more elegant. Her shell was pale gold, and seemed to glow from within. She wore no crown, but thin circlets of silver wrapped around her 4 arms. Her compound eyes were larger than most Volanthi, and they studied Marcus with obvious curiosity. "So this is the human," she said, and her voice was surprisingly soft. "Come closer, Sergeant Cole." Marcus walked forward and stopped at what he hoped was an appropriate distance. He bowed his head slightly. "Your Majesty." "You may look at me," she said with what might have been amusement. "Commander Vyrek's rules are excessive." Marcus raised his eyes and found the Queen watching him with intensity. "Thank you, Your Majesty." "You will serve in my personal guard rotation," she announced, and gasps echoed through the throne room. "This is my decision, and it is final." Commander Vyrek stepped forward. "My Queen, this is highly irregular. This creature cannot be trusted with your safety. Humans are known for their violence and unpredictability. Humans are known for many things, Commander. The Queen's voice hardened. They are also known for keeping their word once given. The Terran Coalition has honored every treaty we have signed. Can all Valanthe factions claim the same? Vyrex's mandibles clicked rapidly, but he said nothing more. He stepped back, and Marcus saw something dangerous flash in those compound eyes. It was hatred, and it was directed at the Queen herself. The first weeks passed slowly. Marcus learned the palace layout and memorized guard schedules. He trained with Valanthe weapons, although his human hands struggled with equipment designed for forearms. The other guards ignored him at best and insulted him at worst. He ate alone and slept in quarters far from the others. But the Queen sought him out. She would appear during his patrols and walk beside him asking questions about Earth. What did rain feel like? Why did humans create music? How could beings with such short lives accomplish anything meaningful? Marcus answered honestly and found himself curious about her in return. She was young for a queen and had inherited the throne after her mother's sudden death. The court viewed her as weak because she preferred diplomacy to war. She had no allies among her own nobles and no friends among her guards. "You are lonely," Marcus said one evening as they walked through a garden of glowing flowers. The Queen stopped walking. "Loneliness is a human concept." "Is it?" Marcus asked. "You spend your nights reading reports alone. You eat every meal in silence. Your guards protect your body, but none of them would die for you. That sounds lonely to me." The Queen was silent for a long moment. "You are very observant for a primitive creature." Marcus smiled. "And you are very kind for a cold insectoid ruler." Something changed between them that night. It was small and fragile, but it was real. They were not friends exactly, but they were no longer strangers. 1 week later, everything changed. Marcus was returning from a training session when he heard voices in a dark corridor. He pressed himself against the wall and listened. "When the swarm attacks the summit, we do nothing." It was Commander Vyrex's voice. "Let nature correct our Queen's weakness." "And if she survives?" another voice asked. "She will not survive. The swarm reclaimers will make certain of that. Our hands stay clean, and we install a proper ruler afterward." Marcus held his breath as footsteps approached. The conspirators passed within inches of his hiding spot and disappeared around a corner. His heart pounded against his ribs. The Queen was in danger, and her own guards planned to let her die. Marcus had no proof and no allies. If he reported this to the wrong person, he would likely end up dead in some forgotten corridor. But if he did nothing, an innocent woman would be murdered. He stood in the darkness for a long time, thinking about duty and honor, and the strange bond he had formed with an alien queen. Finally, he made his choice. He would find a way to protect her, even if it cost him everything. The summit was in 3 days, and Marcus Cole had work to do. The Crystal Heart Pavilion was the most beautiful building Marcus had ever seen. Ancient beyond measure, it had been grown from a single massive crystal that pulsed with soft blue light. The ceiling arched high overhead and seemed to contain entire galaxies of trapped stars. Delegates from across the Valanthe Dominion gathered within its walls, and the air hummed with tension. Marcus stood at his assigned position near the eastern entrance. He wore the ceremonial armor of the Royal Guard, although his human proportions made it fit poorly. His rifle was holstered at his hip, and his eyes never stopped moving. 3 days had passed since he overheard Commander Vyrex's treachery, and he had found no way to stop what was coming. He had tried to warn the Queen. On the night before the summit, he had requested a private audience and told her everything he had heard. She had listened with her large compound eyes fixed on his face. And then she had dismissed his concerns. "My guards have served my bloodline for generations," she had said. Your species is famous for paranoia and conspiracy theories. Perhaps you misheard or misunderstood. I know what I heard, Your Majesty. Commander Vyrek may dislike my policies, but he is a soldier of honor. He would never permit harm to come to me. She had waved one of her 4 hands in dismissal. Return to your quarters, Sergeant. The summit will proceed as planned. So here he stood, watching and waiting for disaster. The Queen sat upon a raised platform at the center of the pavilion. She wore robes of silver and gold, and her pale shells seemed to glow brighter than usual. Around her gathered the representatives of 12 outer colonies and 3 rival political factions. The debates had raged for hours. Colony leaders demanded more resources and greater autonomy. Faction leaders argued about trade routes and military positioning. Through it all, the Queen navigated with impressive skill, and Marcus found himself admiring her political intelligence. But he also watched Commander Vyrek. The large Volanthe stood near the main entrance with a dozen guards under his command. His compound eyes kept drifting toward the sealed doors, and his mandibles clicked in what Marcus now recognized as nervousness. Whatever was planned would happen soon. Marcus made a decision. He left his assigned position and began walking toward the Queen's platform. Protocol demanded that he stay at his post, but protocol would not save her life. "Hue! Human!" Vyrek's voice cut through the chamber. "Return to your station immediately." Marcus ignored him and kept walking. He pushed past startled delegates and climbed the steps to stand beside the Queen's chair. She turned to look at him with surprise. "Sergeant Cole, what is the meaning of this?" "I am staying close to you, Your Majesty. I did not give you permission to abandon your post. With respect, Your Majesty, I do not need your permission to protect you." Commander Vyrek approached with fury in every step. "You will obey orders, human. Remove yourself to the outer perimeter at once." "No." The single word echoed through the suddenly quiet pavilion. Every eye turned toward the confrontation. The Queen rose from her chair, and Marcus could feel her anger like heat from a fire. "Sergeant Cole, you are embarrassing me in front of the entire Dominion. If you do not—" The explosion cut off her words. The main doors blew inward in a storm of crystal shards and smoke. Screaming figures poured through the gap, and Marcus recognized them instantly from intelligence briefings. The Swarm Reclaimers were a terrorist faction that believed the Volanthe had grown soft and needed to return to their ancient predatory ways. They wore no armor and carried weapons made from their own hardened shells. Chaos erupted throughout the pavilion. Delegates scrambled for cover, and some fell to the initial volley of fire. Guards drew weapons and formed defensive positions, and for one moment, Marcus thought they might hold. Then Commander Vyrek raised his staff and gave a single sharp gesture. The guards nearest the Queen broke formation and began retreating toward the side exits. One by one they abandoned their posts until a clear path opened between the attackers and the monarch. "Hold your positions," the Queen shouted, but her voice was lost in the noise of battle. Marcus watched in horror as her own protectors fled. They did not run in panic, but moved with discipline and purpose. This was planned, and this was betrayal. Commander Vyrek met his eyes across the carnage, and the Volanthe's mandibles spread in what could only be a smile. "Enjoy your final moments, human. You should have run when you had the chance." Then Vyrek too was gone, and Queen Seilithra stood alone at the center of destruction. Smoke billowed around her, and flames licked at the ancient crystal walls. The Swarm Reclaimers advanced with weapons raised and murder in their compound eyes. The Queen did not run. She stood tall and faced her death with dignity that made Marcus's heart ache. She had been abandoned by everyone she trusted, and still she refused to show fear. But she was not alone. Marcus drew his rifle and stepped in front of her. He planted his feet and raised his weapon and sighted on the nearest attacker. The world seemed to slow as his training took over. "Get behind me," he shouted. "Sergeant Cole, what are you?" "Get behind me now." He fired, and the lead attacker fell. He fired again, and another dropped. The reclaimers hesitated in confusion, because this was not part of their plan. The guards had been paid to flee, and no one had expected this strange alien creature to stand and fight. Marcus Cole had fought in 12 combat zones across 4 star systems. He had survived ambushes and orbital drops, and hand-to-hand combat with species twice his size. He was just one human with one rifle, but he was not afraid. "Come on then," he roared at the advancing horde. "You want her? You go through me first." The queen pressed against his back, and he could feel her trembling. Whether from fear or shock, or something else, he could not say. All he knew was that she was alive, and he intended to keep her that way. The reclaimers charged, and Marcus Cole became a wall of fire and fury. He shot until his rifle overheated, and then he drew his sidearm. He killed 4 more before they closed the distance, and then he was fighting with fists and elbows and pure human stubbornness. A blade caught his back, and pain exploded through his body. Acid splashed his arm, and he smelled his own flesh burning. Still he fought, because stopping meant dying, and dying meant failing, and Marcus Cole had never failed to protect someone under his care. The queen screamed his name, and it was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. Not because of the scream itself, but because it meant she was still alive. He threw another attacker aside and grabbed her arm. "We need to move. Now." They ran together through smoke and flames and falling crystal. Behind them, the reclaimers regrouped and gave chase. Marcus did not know where they were going, but anywhere was better than here. He only knew that the queen was beside him, and that he would die before he let her fall. They ran through corridors that twisted and turned like the tunnels of some great beast. Marcus kept his grip on the queen's arm and pulled her along behind him. His back screamed with every step, and blood soaked through his armor, but he refused to slow down. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit echoed off crystal walls. "This way," the queen gasped, and pointed toward a narrow passage. Marcus followed her direction, and they squeezed through a gap, barely wide enough for their bodies. The passage opened into a wider hallway, lined with ancient statues of Valanthi warriors. Some had crumbled with age, and their pieces littered the floor like broken bones. "Where does this lead?" "The old throne room. It has not been used in centuries, but the doors are thick." The queen's breathing was ragged, and her golden shell had lost some of its glow. "We can seal ourselves inside." They kept moving, and Marcus's mind raced through options. His emergency beacon was built into his armor, and he had activated it the moment the attack began. But Thyra Prime was deep in Valanthi space, and any human ships would need hours to arrive. They had to survive until then. A group of reclaimers appeared at the end of the hallway. Marcus raised his sidearm and fired 3 quick shots. 2 attackers fell, and the third dove for cover. He pushed the queen into an alcove, and stood in front of her as more enemies poured into the corridor. "Stay behind me." "You are wounded," she protested. "You cannot fight them all." "Watch me." He fired until his sidearm clicked empty, and then he threw it at the nearest attacker's face. The reclaimer stumbled, and Marcus was on him in an instant. He grabbed one of the creature's forearms and twisted until something snapped. The reclaimer screamed, and Marcus took his weapon and used it against the others. The Valanthi were bigger and stronger, but Marcus was faster and more desperate. He had spent his entire adult life learning how to fight beings larger than himself. Humans had always been smaller and weaker than most species in the galaxy, but they had never let that stop them. Another blade found his shoulder, and Marcus grunted in pain. He spun and drove his elbow into his attacker's throat. The reclaimer went down choking, and Marcus grabbed the queen's hand again. "Move!" They ran, and the sounds of pursuit grew closer. Marcus could feel his strength fading as blood continued to pour from his wounds. The acid burns on his arm had turned the skin black, and every movement sent agony shooting through his nerves. "Why are you doing this?" the queen demanded as they ran. "Why did you not flee like the others?" "I do not leave people behind. But I am not your people. I am not even your species. Your duty was to yourself and your survival." Marcus pulled her around a corner and pressed them both against the wall. Footsteps thundered past and faded into the distance. He allowed himself a moment to breathe before answering. "Where I come from, we have a saying, 'No man left behind.' It does not matter who you are or where you come from. If you need help and I can give it, then I will." The queen stared at him with her large compound eyes. "That is irrational. Self-preservation is the foundation of all intelligent behavior. Dying for a stranger serves no evolutionary purpose." "Maybe not." Marcus managed a weak smile despite the pain. "But it is the right thing to do. Being human means choosing what is right over what is easy. It means standing up when everyone else runs away." "Even if it kills you?" "Especially then." They found the old throne room at the end of a forgotten corridor. The doors were massive slabs of dark crystal veined with gold, and they had not been opened in generations. Marcus helped the queen push them apart, and they slipped inside. The room was vast and dark and filled with dust. Ancient banners hung from the ceiling, and a massive throne dominated the far wall. Marcus dragged broken furniture toward the door and began building a barricade. The queen watched him work and then joined in without being asked. "This will not hold them for long." "It does not need to hold them for long." Marcus checked the charge on the Valenthi weapon he had taken. "It just needs to hold them long enough." "Long enough for what?" "For help to arrive. I activated my emergency beacon when the attack started. Human ships will respond." "Human ships? They are hours away at best." "Then we hold for hours." The queen made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been despair. "You truly believe we can survive that long?" Marcus looked at her and saw fear in those alien eyes. He saw exhaustion and grief and the crushing weight of betrayal. Her own guards had abandoned her, and her own commander had sold her life for political gain. Everything she thought she knew about trust and loyalty had been proven false. But she was still standing. She was still fighting. That meant something. "I believe that giving up is not an option." He finished the barricade and positioned himself behind it. "I believe that every second we survive is a victory. And I believe that you are stronger than you know." The doors shuddered as something heavy struck them from outside. Cracks began to spread through the ancient crystal, and dust rained from the ceiling. "They are coming. I know." Marcus raised his weapon. "Get behind the throne and stay down. I will not hide while you die for me. Your life matters more than mine. My life matters no more than any other." Marcus looked at her and felt something shift in his chest. This alien woman, with her strange face and stranger customs, had more honor than anyone he had ever served. She refused to let him sacrifice himself alone. "Then stand beside me." He pulled a broken blade from the debris and handed it to her. "But stay behind me when they break through." The doors exploded inward, and the reclaimers poured through. Marcus opened fire and dropped 3 before they could clear the debris. The queen stood at his shoulder, and her presence gave him strength he did not know he had. They came in waves, and Marcus met them with everything he had. His weapon ran dry, and he used it as a club. He fought with his fists, and his feet, and his teeth. He took wounds that should have killed him, and kept fighting because the alternative was unthinkable. The queen stabbed a reclaimer that got too close, and Marcus felt a surge of pride. She was fighting for her own life and refusing to be a victim. That was worth protecting. More enemies came, and Marcus positioned himself between them and the Queen. He became a wall of human flesh and stubborn will. They could not reach her without going through him, and he had no intention of making that easy. His vision began to blur, and he knew he was dying. Too much blood lost and too many wounds taken. But he could still stand, and as long as he could stand, he could fight. "It has been an honor, Your Majesty." The Queen's voice was thick with emotion. "Do not speak as if this is the end. I am just being realistic." The ceiling exploded and light flooded the chamber. Marcus looked up and saw the most beautiful sight of his life. Coalition gunships descended through the hole, and soldiers in human armor rappelled down on cables. His beacon had worked, and the cavalry had arrived. He smiled and let himself fall. The last thing he heard was the Queen screaming his name. Marcus Cole floated in darkness for a very long time. Sometimes he heard voices speaking in languages he did not understand. Sometimes he felt hands on his body, and pain that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Sometimes he dreamed of Earth and his mother's face, and the smell of rain on grass. Then one day he opened his eyes. The room was bright and clean and filled with machines that hummed and beeped. A window showed stars wheeling slowly past, and Marcus realized he was on a ship. His body felt heavy and strange, and wrapped in bandages that covered most of his skin. "Welcome back to the land of the living." He turned his head and saw a human woman in a medical uniform. She was young, with dark skin and kind eyes, and a smile that made him feel safe. "Where am I?" he murmured. "Medical frigate Hippocrates, you have been unconscious for 6 days." She checked something on a datapad. "You took enough damage to kill 3 normal humans. The doctors say you should be dead. I have always been stubborn." "That is an understatement, Sergeant." She adjusted something on one of the machines. "You have visitors waiting. The entire galaxy wants to meet the man who saved the Valanthe Queen." Marcus tried to sit up, and pain shot through every part of his body. He groaned and fell back against the pillows. "Easy there. You still have weeks of recovery ahead. The acid burns alone required 4 skin grafts." She helped him drink some water. "I will let your visitors know you are awake." The first visitor was a coalition general, who shook his hand and called him a hero. The second was a Valanthe diplomat, who bowed deeply and spoke of eternal gratitude. The third was a news reporter, who asked questions Marcus did not want to answer. But the visitor he waited for did not come until late in the night. He was drifting in and out of sleep when he heard the door open. He turned his head and saw Queen Salithra standing at the foot of his bed. She looked different than he remembered, smaller somehow and more fragile. Her golden shell had regained its glow, but her compound eyes held a sadness that had not been there before. She wore simple robes instead of royal finery, and her 4 arms hung at her sides. "Sergeant Cole." "Your Majesty." He tried to rise, and she raised a hand to stop him. "Please do not. You have done enough." She moved to sit in the chair beside his bed. For a long moment, she simply looked at him, and Marcus felt exposed under that alien gaze. He did not know what she was thinking, and her face showed nothing. "I came to thank you," she finally said, "and to ask you a question that has haunted me since the attack." "Ask me anything." "Why?" The single word carried enormous weight. "Why did you stay when everyone else fled? You could have escaped with the others." "Self-preservation is logical and natural. You would have been justified in saving yourself." Marcus thought about the question. He had been asked it before in other forms, after other battles. Why did humans fight for strangers? Why did they risk everything for people they barely knew? Why did they throw themselves into danger when running was easier? Where I come from, we have a saying, he began. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. But we were not friends. We barely knew each other. We were starting to be friends. Marcus smiled despite the pain. You showed me kindness when no one else would. You asked about my home and listened to my answers. You treated me like a person instead of a primitive curiosity. That is not enough reason to die for someone. It is enough for me. He reached out and touched her arm with his bandaged hand. Being human is not about logic or survival. It is about connections and choices. I chose to see you as someone worth protecting. That choice made all the difference. The Queen was silent for a long time. Her compound eyes glistened with what Marcus realized were tears. He had not known that Volanthi could cry. I have ruled my people for 3 years, she said softly. In that time, I have learned that power is isolation. Everyone wants something from me. Everyone has schemes and ambitions. Even my own guards betrayed me for political gain. Not all of them. No, not all of them. She looked at him with something new in her eyes. One stood and fought, while the others ran. One bled and nearly died rather than abandon a stranger. One human showed me what loyalty truly means. She stood and did something Marcus never expected. She bowed to him. Not the slight nod of acknowledgement she gave to diplomats, but a full, formal bow that bent her body nearly in half. In the name of the Volanthi Dominion, I thank you, Sergeant Marcus Cole. Your courage has saved my life and changed my understanding of the universe. Please do not bow to me. Marcus felt uncomfortable. I was just doing my job. Your job was to stand at your post and follow orders. You did far more than your job. You showed an empire that true strength is not about size or power. True strength is about choice and sacrifice. She straightened and her eyes met his. Commander Virek and 12 other conspirators have been captured. They will face trial for treason. The investigation revealed that they planned to install a hardliner queen who would restart the war with humanity. They wanted war? They wanted the glory of conquest. They believed that peace has made us weak. But watching you fight showed me something important. Humans are not weak, despite your soft bodies and short lives. You are strong in ways we do not understand. Marcus felt exhaustion pulling at him, but he fought to stay awake. What happens now? Now I address my empire. I will tell them what happened and what I learned. I will tell them that the Volanthi have much to learn about strength, and that it does not always wear chitin. That sounds like a good speech. I hope so. She moved toward the door and then paused. Sergeant Cole, when you have recovered, I would like you to return to Thyra Prime, not as part of an exchange program, but as something more. What do you mean? I need advisors I can trust. I need protectors who will not run when danger comes. I need friends who will tell me the truth, even when it is hard to hear. She looked back at him. I need you, Marcus Cole. Will you come back to me? Marcus thought about Earth and his empty apartment and the life he had left behind. He thought about the loneliness of being a soldier with no family and no roots. He thought about the strange connection he had formed with an alien queen who had shown him kindness. I will think about it. The queen's mandibles twitched in what he now recognized as a smile. That is all I ask. Rest now, Sergeant. We will speak again soon. She left, and Marcus stared at the ceiling. The stars wheeled slowly past the window, and somewhere in the distance, a new future waited. He closed his eyes, and let sleep take him. 6 months had passed since the attack on the Crystal Heart Pavilion, and Thyra Prime had transformed. The crystal towers still gleamed under 3 suns, but the air felt different now. There was hope where there had been fear, and unity where there had been division. Queen Selithra had emerged from the chaos stronger than anyone expected. Marcus Cole walked through the palace gardens and marveled at how much had changed. He wore new armor now, with the royal crest on his chest and the insignia of the Queen's personal guard on his shoulder. His scars had faded but not disappeared, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had found his purpose. Sergeant Cole. He turned and saw a young Valanthi guard hurrying toward him. She was one of the new recruits and still learning the protocols. "What is it, Kithara?" "A delegation from Earth has arrived. Tell her I am on my way." He walked through corridors that had once felt hostile and now felt like home. Other guards nodded as he passed, and some even smiled in the Valanthi way. The hatred and suspicion that had greeted him on his first day had slowly transformed into respect and even friendship. The conspiracy's failure had changed everything. Commander Vyrek and his accomplices had been tried and convicted in a public proceeding that was broadcast across the Dominion. The evidence revealed decades of corruption and scheming that went far beyond the assassination attempt. Reforms swept through the military and the government, and the Queen's popularity soared. But more importantly, the story of Marcus Cole had spread. The tale of the human soldier who stood when everyone else ran had captured the imagination of both civilizations. News networks replayed footage from security cameras and showed the moment he stepped in front of the Queen. Children on Earth played games where they pretended to be him. Valanthi scholars wrote papers analyzing his behavior. He had become a symbol of something larger than himself. He represented what humans could be at their best, and what friendship between species could achieve. Marcus entered the throne room and found it filled with dignitaries. Queen Selithra sat on her throne, with her silver circlets gleaming and her golden shell brighter than ever. Around her stood her new advisory council, which included 3 humans alongside the Valanthi nobles. And beside the throne stood a small group of human soldiers in coalition dress uniforms. These were the first wave of human guards to serve alongside the Valanthi in the Royal Protection Detail. The exchange program had evolved into something permanent and real. "Sergeant Cole," the Queen's voice carried easily through the chamber. "Please join me." He walked to the platform and took his place at her right hand. This was his position now, and had been ever since he returned to Thyra Prime 3 months ago. He had thought about her offer during his recovery, and in the end, the decision had been easy. Earth had nothing waiting for him, but Thyra Prime had a purpose. "The delegation from Earth brings news." The Queen gestured toward a woman in diplomatic robes. "Ambassador Chen?" The ambassador stepped forward and bowed. "Your Majesty, the Terran Coalition is pleased to announce the ratification of the new Friendship Treaty. All 12 member worlds have voted in favor. Our civilizations are now formally allied." Cheers erupted throughout the throne room, and Marcus felt his heart swell. The treaty had been negotiated over months of careful diplomacy. It promised mutual defense and free trade and the sharing of technology. It was the most significant agreement between humans and Valanthi in history. "This is a great day." The Queen rose from her throne. 3 decades ago, our peoples fought a terrible war. We lost millions on both sides and gained nothing but grief. Today, we choose a different path. She turned to Marcus, and her compound eyes met his. 6 months ago, I learned what true courage looks like. A human soldier taught me that strength is not about size or numbers. It is about choices. He chose to stand when running was easier. He chose to fight when surrender was logical. He chose to value a stranger's life above his own. The throne room fell silent. Every eye focused on Marcus, and he felt heat rise in his cheeks. "Today I create a new honor." The Queen raised one of her forearms, and a servant brought forward a medal on a crystal chain. "It will be awarded to those who protect others without regard for their own survival. Sergeant Marcus Cole will be the first recipient. She placed the medal around his neck, and the crystal hummed against his chest. It was warm, and seemed to pulse with inner light. He bowed his head, as applause filled the chamber. "I do not deserve this," he whispered. "You deserve far more," she whispered back. Later that evening, after the ceremony, and the speeches, and the endless congratulations, Marcus found himself alone in the garden. The 3 suns had set, and strange stars filled the sky. He sat on a bench made from living crystal, and let the silence wash over him. "May I join you?" He looked up and saw the queen approaching. She had changed from her royal robes into simple clothing, and moved with less formality than usual. Without her circlets and formal posture, she looked almost like a regular person. "Of course, Your Majesty. Please." She sat beside him. "When we are alone, you may call me Salif." "That does not feel appropriate." "Many things about our friendship are not appropriate." Her mandibles twitched in amusement. A Velanthi queen should not sit in gardens with human soldiers. She should not seek their advice or value their company. But here we are. They sat in comfortable silence. Somewhere in the distance music played, and Marcus recognized a human melody being performed on Velanthi instruments. The 2 cultures were beginning to blend in small ways. "I used to think humans were lesser beings," Salith admitted. "Your lives are so short, 80 or 90 years if you are lucky, while Velanthi can live for centuries. I thought that brevity made you insignificant. And now? Now I understand. Your lives burn brief and bright. Perhaps that is why you burn so fiercely for others. You understand what it means to lose time, so you spend it on those you love. You know that every moment matters, so you fill those moments with meaning." Marcus smiled. "That is the most human thing anyone has ever said about us. I learned it from a good teacher." A servant appeared at the garden entrance. "Your Majesty, the new ambassador from Earth has arrived and requests an audience." Salith sighed and rose from the bench. "Duty calls once more." She extended one of her hands to Marcus. "Will you join me?" He took her hand and stood. "Always." They walked together through the palace toward the landing platform. The new ambassador was a young woman who looked nervous and uncertain. She stared at the alien architecture and the towering Velanthi guards with obvious fear. Then she saw Marcus standing beside the queen, and her eyes went wide. Everyone in human space knew his face now. "Welcome to Thyra Prime," the queen's voice carried across the platform. "You stand in the presence of Sergeant Marcus Cole, the man who taught an empire what courage truly means." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Your Majesty, please." Her mandibles twitched. "You will never grow accustomed to praise, will you?" "Probably not." The young ambassador approached and bowed. "It is an honor to meet you, Sergeant Cole. Your story inspired me to join the diplomatic corps." "Then you are already braver than me." He shook her hand. "Welcome to your new home." As the evening continued and introductions were made, Marcus looked up at the alien stars. He had come here as an unwanted obligation and found a purpose. He had expected hostility and found friendship. He had been prepared to die and instead had learned how to live. This was his home now, and these were his people, human and Velanthi together, building something new. The future was uncertain, but Marcus Cole was not afraid. He had stood against impossible odds before, and he would do it again. That was what it meant to be human. The end.